everyone, it's Fionn and welcome back to my channel, Creating the Original Eva Chanel. I hope you're all very well. Today I'm just going to have a little run through the books that I read in May, and I feel like I've said this in the past few monthly wrap-ups, but it was another great reading month. I think 2025 is just going great for me in terms of reading and honestly all aspects of my life, so things are going really good. But today we're here to talk about the books. So the first book that I finished this month was I Fell in Love with Hope by Lan Carley, and I actually read the majority of this in April, but I finished it in May, so it is a little while ago now that I read this. It's about a group of terminally ill patients living in a hospital, and they are trying to take back what elements of control of their life that they can. So they are trying to rebel against the constraints of their diagnoses as a way of doing this. Going on trips outside of the hospital when they probably shouldn't, doing activities that they probably shouldn't, seeing people who they probably shouldn't, just to kind of, well, yeah, like I said, rebel against their diagnoses. And like I mentioned, that they are terminally ill, so I think in some ways they're like, well, I'm going to die anyway, so I may as well make it fun while I can. So yeah, this book is very heavy, and there are so many trigger warnings for this book. You know, there is someone who's abused by their parents, there is disordered eating, self-harm, suicidal thoughts and suicide, and loneliness, and so many other things in between. This is not a book to read when you're not in a good headspace or when you're feeling a bit fragile, because I think it would just destroy you. Like, there's so much heartbreak in this book, but I think it could really strike a chord with reminding you to be hopeful and being really poignant and beautiful, and yeah, just reminding you that you can take control of your life and you can find ways to be happy through the most awful circumstances. And I think it could have a really wonderful balance between heartbreaking and heartwarming. With that said, I just don't think I was the perfect target audience for this, and so it didn't really give me those feelings and those things. It was just okay for me, which is fine. And I don't know why I've got this in my head, because I don't think I've seen it anywhere, but I just feel like this is a YA book, and I think that I might have really enjoyed it when I was kind of a mid to late teen. But having said that, I do worry that I might have romanticised the tragedy of this, and it is tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. I mean, the nature of these characters and the reason they're in this hospital-based book means there is so much death in the book, and it hurts. And I think that potentially could have been a little bit damaging to me as a young reader, because I would have thought it was so beautiful and wonderful, and it is beautifully written, but I think there's a fine line there. And I don't know, because I didn't read this when I was a mid to late teen, I read it now, and so I don't know how I would have responded at that time, but I do worry that I might have responded like that. I do think that some people would feel really seen through this book, and for that reason I think it's a great piece of writing. And like I said, like, the reminders to be hopeful and to find the positives, I do think are really important. But for me, it just didn't quite strike that chord of what I think it could have been for someone else. So for that reason, I gave this book 3.25 stars. Next up, I read What You Were Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama, translated from the Japanese to English by Alison Watts. And this was such a wholesome read. I believe this was my poll winner for this month. It was so wholesome, and it just reminded me to find the joy in life and to never stop doing things for myself and to follow my dreams. And I just really liked it. It was very wholesome, is just the word. This was like nourishment for the soul. And I think it's quite similar to What You're Looking For This is What You're Looking For Is in the Library. I think this book, Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, is a little bit more popular, and I think if you liked this, it's definitely worth picking this up, because it's that same Japanese cozy fiction vibe, and the same way that this book follows 4 characters who go to the same place to go back in time, or to go to a different place in time, and they're all kind of linked by that one common thing, but the stories themselves and the characters themselves are not necessarily linked. This is kind of similar in that it follows, I believe, 5 different characters who all go to this library, and the idea is the librarian can like look at you and have a short brief conversation with you and recommend the exact book that you need to read in your life right now. And they just all came out the other side of it feeling so much happier and more grounded and more aligned with what their dreams and goals are, and it was just really lovely, and I gave this 4 stars. So alongside my monthly poll, I also pull a prompt out of my TBR jar each month, and the prompt this month was a book, an anticipated 2-star or less read. And I think the thought process behind this when I put this prompt in the jar was that sometimes I just need a push to read something that I don't think I'm going to enjoy, and I'll either prove myself correct and get rid of a book that I just don't need to own, or prove myself incorrect and find a book that I actually really enjoy that I've been putting off. And in this case it was the former. I DNF'd this book, Sweet Little Lies by Jill Shalvis, at I think 7 pages. This just wasn't for me. It was cringe and horrible, and for me just not good. That's not to say that someone else might not love this. I do think Jill Shalvis is quite a popular author, but I know now that she's not for me, which is fine. And I'm happy to be moving this off my TBR because I've had it for such a long time. It's just a book that was given to me that I didn't really want at the time, but I never like to turn a book down in case it's an unexpected gem or treasure. This was not that for me, so I will now be getting rid of it. And hopefully someone else can find it and pick it up who does really treasure it, and then that's just so much better than it sitting gathering dust on my bottom shelf. So all good really. And then we moved back up again and I read All In by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is the 3rd instalment in the Natural series, which follows a group of teenagers who have very special talents. I've been told this is like, it's not Crime Watch. Oh, I can't remember, but I think a TV programme which is, I guess, a similar premise to this. And I think some people don't love this for that reason, because it kind of feels like a copy of that, but I've never seen it. So basically it's a group of young people or teenagers who have special skills that allow them to kind of decode cold cases. So the main character and the perspective we're in is Cassie, who is a profiler, and that means she can read people really, really well. There's another character, Leah, who's a natural lie detector, so she can just listen to someone speaking and know if they're telling the truth or not. Dean is a profiler as well. Sloane is a natural statistician, is it called? So she's just so good at maths and statistics and facts. That's her thing. And there's also Michael, who's a natural emotion reader, emotion detector. I think that's all of this kind of group. And in this story they're following a new investigation. They're investigating a series of murders that they believe are all linked, and it was really good. I really liked it. I just found the writing so easy to get into, and I think I just really like YA thrillers, to be honest, and YA in general. I do find the writing typically pretty easy to get into, and I just really liked it, and I gave this 4 stars. Now, I was recommended to read these 2 pretty close together. So this one is Bad Blood, which is the 4th and final instalment in the series, although there is a novella at the end, so I guess just the 4th instalment. Yeah. I was recommended by a good friend to read these close together, so I read this next, and I am glad I did that because the storylines were quite interlinked. However, I found this one at times a little bit over explanatory. They over explained quite a lot. But having said that, I think it was the same as this one. It's just that I had been away from the series for a few months, whereas this time I was going straight into it, so I didn't need things to be explained as much because they were still fresh in my mind. And I had the same experience reading the first 2, which are The Naturals, and then Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct I didn't enjoy as much as The Naturals because it felt a little bit repetitive of things that I'd only just read about, but obviously when the series came out, they came out with gaps in between, so it makes sense for them to give a little bit of backstory about what happened in the previous book. So I think that's kind of what happened with this. I did find the writing a little bit annoying at times in this one, but I just could never quite put my finger on why, so I don't really know what that was about, but I definitely think the first one was my favourite of the whole series. And then, oh, and so I gave this... I gave this one 4.25 stars and this one 4 stars. Now I'm pretty sure I gave the first book, The Naturals, 4.5 and then Killer Instinct 4. So they've all been pretty high reads for me. I have really enjoyed the series as a whole. But I do think the first one was my favourite, which is often the case for me in series, I've noticed. And then right at the end of this book there is a novella called 12, which I personally really liked. The same friend who told me about reading these back to back actually said that she didn't feel that was necessary, and why introduce a new character for just such a short storyline at the end. But for me, and I do understand that, but for me I just felt like it wrapped the whole series up really nicely and brought everything together, and I really liked it personally, and I gave that 4 stars as well. Next I read The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street by Helena Hanff. Now this book obviously says 84 Charing Cross Road. This is a 2 book in one for me, which when I bought this I didn't know. I thought it was just 84 Charing Cross Road, and I read this in I think February of last year, and it wasn't what I was expecting. I thought it was fiction. I thought it was going to be just like a cozy, comfy little nice read, and it's not that. It's a series of letters written by, or I guess between Helena Hanff, who was living in, I believe, New York, and a shop owner who owned 84 Charing Cross Road bookshop. And they're all real, but I didn't really enjoy that. It wasn't what I was expecting, and it just wasn't really for me. I did finish 84 Charing Cross Road, but this time around I think I read 14 pages of The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street and I wasn't vibing it. I knew I didn't enjoy the first book, so it was probably going to be the same experience, and I just thought, what's the point? So I decided to put this one down. I also noticed that it seemed to be in a mix of the present and past tense, which just, that's not it for me. So yeah, this was a DNF for me. Then I did a scavenger hunt to pick my next read, and it was The Wrong Sister by Claire Douglas. And the first 100 pages of this, I found it quite hard to get into. I wasn't really vibing with them. But then it was like a flip switched. So, no, that is right. Then it was like a flip switched. And I loved it after that. So I read those first 100 pages and I wasn't sure about them. But then I binged 350 pages in one day, which I never normally do. So I obviously was really gripped by this. And after those, like, this is a 400 and something page book, I think 402. So after those first 100, I was like, this is okay. I've read 2 books by this author prior to this one. One I just found okay, and one that I really liked. So at those first 100, I thought it was going to be more like that first book, I think, The Sisters. But then it just changed, and it was so much better after that bit, and it was really thrilling and gripping. I did predict a few of the things that were going to happen, but there were some things that got me, which is always a good thing. It's always nice to be surprised by some plot twists in a thriller. The main thing for me in this book was that the chapters just flowed so well into one another, and I don't know why. I can't describe what made me feel that way about it, but I just did. I just got to the end of a chapter and I just kept going as if it was the same paragraph. I just really enjoyed it. And the characters were flawed, like very flawed in this book, but not really in a way that was, generally not in a way that was detrimental to the story, which I appreciate. It kind of added to the story, and it made the story make sense why these things were happening to these people, because they've made bad decisions in the past. Not always, but sometimes it felt like that. Yeah, okay, you kind of reap what you sow. But at other times, stuff was just like happening to them like it does when you're unlucky in a thriller book. But yeah, this book was just so good. I'd really recommend it. And I ended up giving this 4.25 stars. Following that, I picked up Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Arnfield. I found the writing quite difficult to get into in this book, and I think I started to think, well, I've already DNF'd a couple of books this month. Maybe this is just me, maybe I'm not giving them enough chance or being open-minded enough. But when I think back to the book I'd read before, The Wrong Sister, I'd got into it straight away. And when I did move on to the next book, I got into it straight away. So that does show me that sometimes the writing is just not for you, and that's okay. And I think that was the case with this book. I ended up DNFing this at 114 pages, which is pretty much exactly halfway through. It's 229. I really tried to persevere with this, but it just wasn't for me, and I was just getting bored, honestly. One feature that I did really like is that the chapters alternate between the perspective of the two wives, Miri and Leah, and Leah's chapters were much shorter than Miri's chapters, which I really appreciated because it really showed the difference in their characters and personalities, and I felt like that was a nice touch. But I was quite bored. In Leah's chapters, although they were short, there was a lot of talk about the engineering and the craftsmanship, I guess, of submarines, which in snippets would have been quite interesting to me, but that is not something that I'm really interested in. And there was a lot of talk about that. It was quite dreary, and I don't know, this wasn't for me. And then having read a lot of people's reviews of this on Storygraph afterwards, I am happy with my decision to DNF it. And the reviews weren't necessarily bad, but things maybe that people, some of them were not particularly positive, but things that people were picking up on as positives were not things that I would have found positive. So I'm glad I decided to DNF this because it just wasn't for me. And then finally I read Reptile Memoirs by Silja Ulstein, translated from the Norwegian into English by Alison McCulloch, and this book was a wild ride. This book is so weird. And I think aside from all that weirdness of the characters who are so unique, the plot of this is a thriller, but the thriller wasn't crazy, but I don't think it needed to be, because what you were reading inside the minds of the characters, who are so morally grey or just morally bad in some scenarios. But yeah, kind of the craziness of what you're reading in their thoughts and seeing them doing means that the actual plot of the thriller didn't need to be super crazy, because it's more kind of a character study, I think, than the storyline. This book is absolutely unique. I've never read anything like this, and I doubt many people have. And I would recommend this if you're looking for something very unique with a bit of thriller vibes, but you have to be open-minded to the fact that this is weird, because otherwise you're not going to like it. The damaged characters though, and their questionable choices, they just made for such great reading. I think that was what I was trying to say, like, yeah, the plot's the plot and that's fine, but what's going on in their heads is way more interesting than the actual plot. And the characters are ridiculous, but that did make for a really great read. And I do think it was a great study and like observation of the human psyche and what people are like in private compared to the version of themselves they show to the world. I do think it was very well thought out, and I think it's quite, I don't think brave is the right word, but forthcoming maybe, I don't know. It's just like this author really put herself out there by putting this into a book and letting people read some of the wild stuff that her mind has come up with that most people won't want to share with the world. I really liked it. I feel like I shouldn't have, but I did. And I gave this also 4.25 stars. So as you can see, I've actually had a really great reading month. Yes, I did have a few DNFs, but from the books I actually finished, my average rating was 4 stars, which is really high. And I'm really happy with how my reading went this month. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back in a week's time with another video. Bye!